Hello there guys, and welcome to another one of my reviews. Today we are going to dissect one of the most affordable electric cars on the market today. We are going to talk about the new Opel or Vauxhall, depending on where you're watching, Corsa E. So what is this car? Well, plainly put, this is the electric version of the 6th generation Corsa. This model, this car has been a bestseller in Europe for years before the whole crossover SUV madness began. The Corsa was initially launched back in the 80s, and back then it was a subcompact car just like it is today, that was meant to be easy to run and very useful in crowded urban areas. And it was a bestseller from the get-go. It was so popular in Europe that at the end of the 90s, this was the best-selling car in the whole continent, selling upwards of 1 million units per year. So it's quite impressive how far it has come. Now the F generation, because the Opel generations are kept tabs on using letters. Now the F generation we have here has been launched late last year, and it has both internal combustion engine versions and an electric version like the one we have today. And for the first time in many years, this car is being built on a French platform. And some of you know that Opel is now part of the Stellantis group, after being bought by PSA and after PSA merged with FCA. So it is part of the largest group, automotive group in the world. So it uses the EMP platform that is shared with cars like the Peugeot 208, the Citroën C4 and the Opel Mokka, and so on. There are so many models based on this platform. And as you can guess, it uses the same specs as all the electric alternatives that I mentioned before, like the E208, the E2008, and the EC4 or the Opel Mokka E. So it has the same specs as well. It has a 136 horsepower motor under the hood, electric motor of course, that powers only the front wheels, and a 50 kilowatt hour battery in the floor, out of which you can actually use 45 kilowatt hours. And in terms of size, it has grown on the previous model. It is expected to do so. It didn't only grow in length, width and height, but also in weight, especially if we're talking about the electric model. Actually, only if we talk about the electric model, because the regular internal combustion engine version is actually 100 kilos lighter than the previous generation, because it uses an aluminum hood, it uses all sorts of steels that are lighter and stronger at the same time, and all sorts of tricks to cut down on weight. But since we have a huge battery pack on this car, this is heavier. This tips the scale at 1500 kilos. To give you a better idea how much heavier this car is, at 1500 kilos it is twice as heavy as the original Opel Corsa launched in the 1980s. So yeah, it has grown a bit. Now in terms of design, I actually like the way it looks. It adheres to the design principles of Opel these days, and compared to a regular Corsa, there aren't many differences, as we've seen on other cars. The front grills are actually both open, and I'm sure that doesn't help with the drag coefficient, but it does look very normal and down to earth. The only areas up front where you will have some blockages are these side vents, and that's about it. I like the headlights, I like the shape of the car overall, I like the character lines, and I like the DRL setup in the headlamps that uses LED technology. From the sides, you'll also notice nothing has changed. We have a bitonal finish over here with the roof done in black and the rest of the car done in red. And I actually like this setup. And you can get up to 17-inch wheels like we have on this car over here. And the one thing you will notice on the Corsa E, if you compare it to a normal Corsa and you have a keen eye for detail, is the fact that the wheels on the Corsa E have these plastic protective covers on them to make them as aerodynamic as possible. You also have an E element over here on the B pillar that also tells you this is an electric car. From the back, things are just the same, really good looking, simple, and the only difference compared to a regular thermic internal combustion engine Corsa is the fact that where you would get the normal tailpipe, you now have a cover. It's actually quite funny how they did that, because they didn't create a different bumper, they just used a cover for that area over there. And the boot is rather small, 290 liters, 309 on the regular petrol-powered model. It's within the specs of its main rivals in the segment, which would be the Renault Zoe or the Peugeot E208. For now, we're expecting more cars to enter this segment in the future. Inside the car, things are pretty normal, pretty standard for a car in this segment. Now, this is a volume car, this is a B segment car, and you can't really expect great materials all around. So we do have a good fit and finish. I mean, the materials used aren't perfect, but at least they are finished as you would expect from a manufacturer with such an experience in the industry. You don't see any gaps anywhere, and everything is fitted as you would expect. But we do have a lot of cheap plastic in here, especially on the door cards and on the bottom half of the dashboard, which would be fine for an internal combustion engine Corsa, but not on this car, which is over 30,000 euros on most markets. So I expect the customers to understand that, but most of them won't. In terms of ergonomics, everything is where you would expect it to be. It's really easy to find everything you need. The HVAC controls are still analog, and that's a great plus in my book, because we don't have a lot of touch sensitive areas. We do have an infotainment screen over here, which is really nicely integrated into the overall dash design. And it does look really good, but the graphics aren't great. The menu is a bit weird to operate, and it is a similar system with what you would find in a Peugeot. Luckily, you get Android Auto and Apple CarPlay in this car with a wired connection. It's okay. It's going to be fine for most use cases. And having Android Auto and Apple CarPlay really solves every single issue I have with this system. Another complaint is the fact that the rear view camera is really poor. Not a great quality at all, but it does help out when parking this car, even though we do have great visibility out the back. As for the instrument cluster, whatever version you get a digital display behind the wheel. The only difference between cheaper and more expensive cars will be the size of it. Now we have the base one over here. It's a 7-inch display. It gets the job done. I wouldn't spend extra for the better looking one. Other than that, I also have to criticize the amount of piano black or gloss black in this car. It will attract a lot of dust and fingerprints, and it is in a lot of places. But on the good side, we do have a surprising amount of storage spaces, and they are decent in size, especially the door bins. They are quite big. Not so much in here in the armrest, but that's okay. It's a small car. I will not hop in the back because I simply cannot fit. It's a very cramped rear seat, especially if we're talking about two people of my size. I'm 6 feet tall and about 250 pounds. And if you want to see two people of my size, one behind the other, you won't be successful, at least for, if you want to get a decent amount of comfort for both of them. So yeah, if you're under 6 feet, maybe 5.5, 5, 6, you will have plenty of room in the back, but I won't do any gymnastics today to fit in there. Now let's hop on the road and see how this car drives and talk about its specs and other stuff. Now that we hopped behind the wheel of the new Opel Corsa E, let's talk about the way it drives and the specs for a moment. So as I mentioned earlier, this car is built on the same platform as a number of other Stellantis products, or should I say PSA, because only the cars in the former PSA range are still being built on this platform for now. I'm sure there will be some FCA products using this platform as well in the future, but for now it's only PSA. So we're talking about the Peugeot 208, we're talking about the Opel Mokka, we're talking about a number of cars in the offering of the Stellantis group overall. So since this is an electric model, the electric specs of the E208 are applied here as well. So we have a 136 horsepower motor under the hood with 260 Newton meters of torque, and it's sending the power only to the front axle. It is joined by a massive battery in the floor with a total capacity of 50 kilowatt hours, 50 kilowatt hours, and a usable capacity of 45 kilowatt hours. And according to Opel, this should allow the car to achieve a range of about 350 kilometers with a single charge. Well, maybe that's true in ideal conditions, and to be fair, these results they get according to the WLTP testing cycle do represent a best case scenario, just like it's the case with internal combustion engine cars. When you see a 5 liter per 100 kilometers covered fuel consumption listed in the owner's book of any car, you should probably already know that that refers to the best case scenario. Real life results will vary, so most of the time cars do tend to be a bit more thirsty. And I did my usual range test with this car. You can find the video on my channel. I'll have a link over here in the top right hand corner. So I got about 280 kilometers around town, about 300 outside the city limits, and 200 on the highway, which is pretty far from the official claims, but that's how it usually goes. Now, I should mention that the weather during my time with the car was extremely hot, 40 degrees Celsius. I had to run the AC on full blast all the time, but I am running on super efficient tires, Michelin Primacy 4, and they do help out a bit. I mean, it could have been worse. It could have been cold, and when it's cold out, the range drops significantly, and that's because of the chemical reaction in the batteries. That's really not, let's say, not a fan of colder temperatures. And I'm guessing during wintertime you could cut about 40% of that range. But this car was created to be used around town mainly, and that's obvious when you look at the specs and how the car is equipped in standard, guys, because as standard you can only charge it at 7.4 kilowatts. But you can get an optional charger for 11 kilowatt chargers. That's available. We don't have a AC charging possibility up to 22 kilowatts. That's missing from the spec sheet for some reason. You can't even get it as an optional extra. And if we're talking about fast charge, you can use stations up to 100 kilowatts. And that means you could recharge this car from 15% to 80% in about 30 minutes. Now, I did charge the car using a 50 kilowatt fast charger, and I got from 40% to 85% in about 30 minutes, which is pretty nice. I noticed that the car took 50 kilowatts up to 85%. Usually after 80%, electric cars tone down their power in order to preserve the battery, but it didn't happen in this case. And I'm quite satisfied with the way it charged. Of course, most people who will buy this car will use AC chargers, and that's actually recommended because using a fast charger all the time will damage the battery cells, because it will heat them up rather intensely, and you should probably keep that in mind. But overall, I think the charging curve is pretty decent on this car. And if you're going to use it around town, make sure you charge it at AC chargers, because if you're driving this car for your daily routine, you probably need to charge it like once a week, and that shouldn't be an issue for most people. This isn't a car designed to be used for long commutes or on the Autobahn where you don't have any speed limits. As a matter of fact, this car will only do 150 kilometers an hour, so it's really not that fast overall, and it will reach 100 kilometers an hour from standstill in 8.1 seconds, which is decent. And actually the car feels zippy around town. That instant torque feels really nice all the time, and it's quite fun to drive. I forgot how fun small cars are to drive, because I've only had experience with larger cars recently. But if you want to drive it in a sportier manner, it will be fine up to about 6/10. It will understeer in the corners quite a bit, but as I said, this is not supposed to be considered a racer per se. This is more of a city car. And to that regard, I am pleasantly surprised that the suspension does its job really nicely. Usually when we talk about cars that are built on platforms that were initially designed for internal combustion engines, they lack a bit in the comfort department because the suspension has to be beefed up in order to cope with the extra weight. To be more precise, this car tips the scale at 1.5 tons, which for a B segment car is quite a lot. To put that in perspective, this is twice as heavy as the original Corsa E back in the 1980s, so it's quite a heavy car. But the suspension does a good job at leveling out the surface you're driving on. And yeah, there are some instances where you can feel a couple of jolts coming into the cabin, especially if we're talking about short and repeated bumps. The chassis will dance a little, but it's not a huge issue, and the suspension is quite well muted out as well. So overall, I give it a thumbs up. So I think this car is a proper rival for, well, a number of models in this segment. As a matter of fact, there aren't too many, to be precise. We're talking about the Renault Zoe, which will probably be going out of production now that the Megane electric is in production and has a price tag really close to the Zoe, but it's also a bit more spacious and comes with more tech and a better interior. So this car is a rival for the Zoe, but you could also consider the Megane, the entry-level Megane, a rival for it. We also have the Peugeot E208, and you could also consider the Mocha E a rival for this car. So it's really a battle between Stellantis models for now. We're still waiting for a completely electric Clio, for example. We're still waiting for a completely electric Fabia or a completely electric Fiesta, but I am quite sure that they won't come out anytime soon because most companies are focused on creating electric crossovers and SUVs because that's what sells today. So I'm really looking forward to an electric Puma, for example, because that's quite possible to come out in the next few years. And the likes, the electric T-Roc and so on. So overall, this car is almost unchallenged in this segment right now. Pricing will vary depending on where you live. Right here is this car costs around 33,000 euros. So yeah, it is expensive for a B segment model, but then again, it's an electric car. So electric cars do have those huge batteries that cost a lot of money and have to be taken into account as well when thinking about the price tags they have. Overall, I liked it. I think it has some character, not a lot of it, because there are so many familiar Peugeot things inside this cabin. But I do like its exterior design. It's a well-built car. It's good to drive around town, and it will be really easy to park, and it will do its city driving part brilliantly. If you don't ask it to do stuff it wasn't designed to do, I think it's going to be a pretty good car overall. That said, this has been my review of the Opel Corsa E. I'm pretty sure you still have some more questions about it. Don't be afraid to drop a comment in the section below to ask me anything you would like to know additionally about it. I'm sure I missed out on a number of topics. Until next time, don't forget to like, share, and of course subscribe to keep this channel alive. Ciao.